let me, at this point, with no further ado, turn the program over to Eric Schwartz, who will handle today's program.
Thank you, Ben. Just some rules of engagement on the meeting today. So both Stewart and I would both love this if it would become more of a conversation. So if you have any questions for Stewart, please put them into the chat box, and I will ask him as we go through this conversation. Without further ado, we're extremely excited to be able to talk with Stewart Kohl. He's the co-founder of Riverside Companies. A person that works with him, that knows him, has described him as one of the preeminent business leaders in the country, a fantastic business sense, generous, intelligent, and a really good guy. And so with that, Stewart, I guess I'd just like to ask you if you could just start by giving us a brief description of Riverside Companies and what you do.
Yeah, sure, Eric. And let me take this opportunity to thank you for the invitation, to thank Ben and the Free Enterprise Institute, and thank the folks who have dialed in, including a lot of my friends from around Cleveland. The Riverside Company was founded in 1988. Our focus for the ensuing 32 years has been to focus on the smaller end of the middle market. We think that's the most exciting, most innovative, and most fun part of our economy. We think there are wonderful small businesses that want to and deserve to get bigger, and if I can say it, better. And we've developed an organization that's designed to help them to achieve that. We do that importantly by providing capital. We have about 12 billion of assets under management, so we're not going to run out of money anytime soon. But we pride ourselves in providing much more than just financial capital. We also provide intellectual capital. And by that, I mean, we have watched so many companies. We've invested in over 650 of them in our history and watched how they progressed, and feel like we have a remarkable set of resources to help companies grow and succeed, and to face challenges like so many companies faced during the pandemic in 2020. We do this investing across North America, Europe, and Australia. We do it out of about 15 offices with 330 employees. And importantly, we do it by providing not only what you might first think of as controlled private equity, but also private credit, where we're making just loans to these businesses, and also structured capital, which is has aspects of both debt and equity, but has us not in control of the company.
You know, back in '93, I think you had about $20 million in assets under management, compared with more than $10 billion today. Aside from, the obvious, it's just much bigger. What have been some of the bigger changes that you've had to deal with or navigate through since you started this company?
Yeah. So, many of your participants here run companies, and they know how competitive the world is. And private equity, private capital, as we participate in it, has been a very good industry for most of the 3 decades that we've been doing this. But I've certainly watched it become increasingly competitive. Sometimes just stunned by how much smarter our people are today than I was when we started. How many more resources that they can bring to these companies to help them grow, and how much more competitive it is. The competition today, whether that's for good investment opportunities, good management talent, good investors for Riverside itself, or even our own employees. I have a lot of respect for our market economy. It just keeps getting more and more competitive, and I think that's probably at the root of your belief in free enterprise.
Absolutely. You've got to, on a daily or annual basis, look at tons and tons of investment opportunities in companies every single year. What are some of the attributes or things that stand out to you as some of the very best companies that you've seen? What do they embody? I mean, what do they look like?
Sure. Yep. And let me just quantify for you, if I may. In a calendar year like 2020, we'll look at about 4,000 investment opportunities. And if you're intellectually curious, Mondays are really fun at Riverside because they start at 8 a.m. In Cleveland when it's the afternoon in Europe. And we talk about all the European deals for the week. And then we go on from there to our two North American control funds, and micro cap fund and the RCAP fund. And then we do some internal meetings to run the firm. And by then it's about 5 or 6 p.m. and we'll turn our attention to Australia, where it's now Tuesday morning down under, and we'll do the same there. So in the course of a typical Monday, we'll have talked about literally 100 or more companies, some for 30 seconds and some for an hour, because these are also the forums where we make our investment decisions. What we're looking for are what I'll say are special little companies. And for 32 years, I've been trying to define special. And the best I've ever been able to come up with is Justice Potter Stewart's definition of pornography, which is we know it when we see it.
Yeah.
These businesses lead in a niche. They have, even though they're small companies, they're real companies. They're important companies, important not just to their owners, but to their customers and their vendors and their communities. They're innovative, they're growing, they're profitable, often surprisingly profitable businesses. And again, I suspect your participants here today run many companies like that. And then we're looking for our ability to transform these businesses. Because in today's market, by the time somebody like a Matt Hansen, who I think is on the call with us today, has worked his magic, the buyer's going to have to pay a very full price for the company. So now the question is, what can you do with it during your period of ownership to make it bigger and better? And for us, that typically means we want to at least double or triple the size of the business and further professionalize it. So we're looking for those opportunities and a concrete idea for how we're going to do it. And that often involves add-on acquisitions. Add-ons are accounting for 2/3 or more of all the deals that we're doing today. I'm happy to talk more about add-ons this morning. We're not impact investors in the sense of, we lead with do good or our hearts. And we're certainly focused most importantly on delivering consistently good returns for our investors. But we do very much take to heart, if you're familiar with ESG, environmental, social, and governance, we really look at the values of the business. We tried to think about things like diversity and inclusion and how we can do more there. And those are considerations. So it's a lot to consider. And I should have mentioned at the outset, there are 7 industry specializations that we focus on.
So here's the inevitable question, right? So before COVID, things were rolling along. The M&A market was hot, lots of money chasing not that many deals, valuations were skyrocketing. And then we got into this period of COVID and everything kind of ground to a halt. What do you see happening now? What are you currently doing? What's the post-COVID period going to look like? Just what are some of your observations in the mergers and acquisitions market today?
Sure, Eric. And let me, if I may, add a couple of minutes on 2020 from where we sat. Okay. The year started normally. January, we were actually quite optimistic. We were going to have a strong 2020 from an M&A perspective, if you will. A lot of deals, a lot of opportunities. We're going to buy a lot of companies, and importantly, we're going to sell a lot of companies because that's very important to what we do. And then, because we have an office in China, in January, we started to hear reports of COVID and supply chain issues. If you'll remember the issues with the Lunar New Year, and our companies began to scramble. But we still weren't expecting a pandemic per se. We are also active, as I mentioned, in Europe. We own some businesses in Italy, and you'll recall that Italy became one of the first countries after China to be significantly impacted. So by February, we were realizing that this is a much bigger issue, and we began to organize to be able to help our companies survive. And it was just that existential threat. We really worried about their ability to survive this period. And that was very much our focus starting in March and through Q2. Our team did a spectacular job of just that. And I define our team as being not only the 330 Riversiders around the world, but the 20,000 plus folks that work at the companies that we have invested in. We can chat if we have time today about how resilient we are as a species and our companies are in again the free enterprise system. By June, we were actually starting to say to ourselves, while this is going to be bad, it is bad. People are dying and businesses are shuttered. It isn't the end of the world. By the way, the world ends far fewer times than people predict, which is really a really good thing for all of us.
Yep.
And that there should be opportunity for us. And having been doing this now for over 3 decades and watching cycles, we said to ourselves, we want to be aggressive buyers. We want to be out buying. We weren't yet ready to start selling our companies again because we weren't confident we'd get full and fair value in this environment. But buying, yes. So by the and in fact in June, we were pleasantly surprised to see that our companies actually grew slightly in June of 2020 over June of 2019, just slightly. Some of that was catch up from April and May, but they did grow a bit. So starting this summer, we began to pursue deals aggressively. Special focus on add-ons, which are easier to consummate and are wonderful value creation opportunities. By the fall, we realized that the M&A was coming back, and we even began to restart some of our sale processes and ultimately sold 7 companies last year. That's about half of what we planned to do, but 7 more than we thought we would sell sometime around April or May. And our investors were obviously delighted to get those distributions in this year. Looking at M&A from a macro perspective, I just saw the fourth quarter stats in the US, and I think it's predictive globally. M&A as a whole was just under $1 trillion for the quarter. And that would be down, but down single digits from 2019. So the recovery that we saw was not just Riverside, it was much broader than that. And in fact, the fourth quarter was an extremely active year for us. In December was our most active month ever, if you define activity just on number of companies, not dollars deployed.
Thank you. I'm going to back up, Greg. Jens asks, what are those 7 industries that you focus on, Stewart?
Sure. So I'm going to surprise folks and lead with IT and software. People may not think of Riverside first with that, but it is our one of our most active specializations. We've been doing it for about 15 years now. And then the second one would be a complement to that, which we call tech-enabled business services. So you may not sell software per se, but you're in essence selling technology to solve business problems, if you will. We love franchising, franchisors, not franchisees, and we're not big into hotels and fast food. So it's not necessarily the franchises you think of first, but it's been a very rich area for us. And next would be training and education, and training in particularly training. And by that, I mean the type of training that we all need to get certified, keep a certification, get a promotion, get a raise, advance our careers, not sort of just, I love liberal arts education. I'm a product of liberal arts education, but this is much more focused on hard skills, if you will. And what those specializations have in common is that they all have recurring revenue, and we love recurring revenue. My father was a manufacturer's representative. He was a traveling salesman. So he got up in the morning and every day he had to go make a sale or we didn't get any money. I love businesses that have subscriptions, that have contracts, that have customers that have signed up for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, and are going to be paying, whether that's for the SaaS software, whether that's for the online training, whether that's for the royalty, the beautiful royalty streams and franchises and the like. So those are four of our very important specializations. We started doing specialty manufacturing and distribution, and we still do. Still a meaningful part of what we do, but people might be surprised that it's less than about 20% of our activity, but still an important specialization. We do some consumer goods, consumer brands. We do them cautiously. B2C is a lot harder than B2B. If you show me a B2B company, and I can dig in and figure out what the return on investment is for their customers, how they make their customers more profitable, then I'm not the world's smartest guy, but it's kind of ipso facto that those customers are going to keep buying that product. Yeah. When you talk about B2C, why do any of us buy a product? The consumer is fickle. We've done some very successfully. If any of you have enjoyed Kate's chocolate chip cookies, that was a outstanding transaction for us in that space. But it is something that we're quite cautious about.
Williamson asks, is Riverside or Stewart planning on getting into a SPAC? It seems like a natural extension of a private equity firm by taking a portfolio company public.
And the answer is it's something we're evaluating. We're watching the SPAC phenomenon, and it is phenomenal. What's happened, if you haven't taken a hard look at it, take a look at the volume of activity. It's remarkable. So it is in that sense encouraging. On the other hand, we have a strategic plan at Riverside, and we want to make sure we don't get distracted just by bright, shiny objects. We want to stay on plan. So we're doing an evaluation right now to see how adding a SPAC to what we do would complement our activities, would make us a stronger firm, and allow us to provide even better returns to our investors. And we should complete that analysis over the next month or two, and then make a decision.
Okay, thanks. So back to M&A. You've been through numerous transactions. What are some of the common pitfalls, mistakes that are associated with the M&A process? I mean, we've got a lot of business owners and business advisors on this call. They're buying businesses, selling businesses. They're trying to raise capital. They have liquidity events from selling the business. What are some of those mistakes that you see people make, and what suggestions do you have for others so they don't make those same mistakes?
So I'll answer just as you asked a question, Eric, from the perspective of the business owner, if you will. And I think the first one sounds awfully simple, but it's really powerful. It's really important. Be clear about your objectives. What are you trying to achieve in a transaction? Is it retirement, going to the beach? Is it bringing in a partner for growth? Be clear about what you're looking for. A lot of sellers wade into the market without a clear understanding, and there are many alternatives available today. But it all starts with, to me, what is the owner's objective. Know that it's a journey. Know that you're going to have a lot of work ahead. Be organized in advance. Importantly, for you CFOs out there, that means making sure you've got excellent data, good systems, the ability to respond to inquiries. If any of you have been through the due diligence process, you know how thorough it can be. And It's not something you can kind of just skirt by on. And going along with that, get great advisors, great lawyers, great accountants, and great bankers. They really earn their fees in these transactions because of their experience doing it over and over again. Then importantly, pick the right partner, one that will help you meet your objectives, and one who is a good cultural fit. And what do I mean by cultural fit? I don't think it's necessarily important that that you be best friends. I don't think it's necessarily important that you share hobbies or avocations. I mean, those things are nice, but I don't think those are at the key. I think the key is how do you do business? How does your partner do business? And is there a good fit between the two of you? Because if there isn't, everything might work out if everything goes swimmingly and there's never an issue, but that's generally not the case. Even in our most successful transactions, there's typically stuff happens. And if there's a good cultural fit, then you're going to work through the stuff and get to the best outcome. And that's where culture becomes so important in these processes.
You talk about culture, and that is very important. And, as we look at people that might buy our businesses, right, which is the biggest transaction most of these individuals are going to have, mm-hmm. How important is culture, and what are some other important qualities that they should be considering when they compare potential buyers of their companies?
I think culture is almost paramount. I mean, let's put it this way. If you're sensing that it's not a good cultural fit, don't move forward with that party. It's just, you're begging for issues. Again, you don't need to be best friends. And I'm always a little cautious when I use the word culture, because the core of culture, the word culture is cult. And I don't, Riverside is not a cult. We're a diverse organization by design. But Riversiders, whether they're in Munich, Germany, in Melbourne, Australia, or Dallas, Texas, if you were to sit down and have lunch with a Riversider, you would find a commonality in terms of how they think about the world, how they think about businesses, how they go about their work, a desire to structure win-wins as opposed to zero-sum games, how to focus on baking bigger pies instead of fighting over the slice of the pie, the size of the slice of the pie. So these types of issues, I think, are extremely important. And you're right, this is going to be the largest transaction of your lifetime, most likely. It's going to be a long endeavor, 5 years or more. And it's going to be a pretty intense endeavor. If you're organizing a partnership where you stay in, then you're going to be working together every day. So I would urge folks to think about it in that way and recognize that the stakes are that high.
As sellers take a look at potential buyers, one of those potential buyers is likely going to be a private equity firm. And most often there's a misconception that if you sell to a private equity firm, it automatically means that you're going to lose control of your company. Can you walk us through the various different kinds of private equity firms and the different flavors?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I really have seen over my 30 plus years is the way private capital now has diversified to provide so many different flavors, if you will. We're Baskin Robbins today, and you can choose your flavor of ice cream. The traditional buyouts are still a large part of what we do at Riverside and what the private equity industry as a whole does, and that's where we're going to come in, and we're going to buy somewhere between 51 and 80%, and in a few cases even 100% of the company, where somebody, either because of a health issue or an estate issue or lifestyle choice, just wants to exit. But we also do many forms of minority investing, where we're a non-controlling partner, and there's a set of rights and responsibilities, if you will, that govern the relationship between the company, the source of capital, and the original owner. Within those, growth capital has become a bigger and bigger thing. It's still smaller than traditional private equity, but it's growing faster. And that's because there are so many companies today, and particularly fast-growing technology businesses, fast-growing consumer businesses that are consuming capital for growth. And they're in essence, if you think about a SaaS software business, it in essence is buying revenue, and that's going to maximize the value of the firm because down the road it's going to trade as a multiple of its recurring annual recurring revenue. So historically, companies could only buy revenues as fast as they generated cash to invest in sales, marketing, product development, and the like. But today, with growth capital, you can accelerate, you can supercharge that growth. And we have a number of funds and products, in particular one designed for newer, younger SaaS software businesses that might only have 3 or 5 million of annual recurring revenue today, but are not profitable, and they shouldn't be. They should be growing faster, and we'll provide the capital to help them grow faster, and we'll get paid back on a royalty basis, a % of those growing sales, which we think beautifully aligns the interests of the business owner, typically the founder of that software business, and Riverside. And then I mentioned at the outset that we also do private debt. We also make loans to companies that are going through transactions, much like the transactions Riverside might sponsor, but not with Riverside.
Everyone loves stories, Stewart. You've had many, many successes in your career. Can you share with us maybe your favorite story or two of some of your biggest home runs you've had?
Sure. And I love all of my children, every deal. But I mentioned Tate, and I like to cite Tate's just because it's for many of our companies, they're not products you'd be familiar with, but amazing how many people have become addicted to the world's best tasting chocolate chip cookies. And that's a deal where we partnered with the founder, a woman named Kathleen. She literally had the recipe and baked these in her kitchen. It's quite a story. She had the business, she sold it, it kind of failed. She bought it back, she grew it. We partnered with her, grew it extraordinarily together. When I say extraordinarily, we tripled the size of the business, not using add-ons, all organic growth. And then ultimately we sold it to a large industry player for a very successful outcome. We were very proud of the way we grew the business, which was by dramatically increasing distribution, increasing the number of doors and stores that it was in, and coming out with some real innovations. My favorite being Tiny Tates. We came out with the Tate's cookies that instead of being about this big or about this big, that means you can eat a lot more of them. And that was a very successful innovation for us. I mentioned that our love of franchisors, and here I'll cite a company called the Dwyer Group. It's actually been rebranded more recently as Neighborly. And my guess is few, if any of you, have heard of Dwyer or Neighborly, but I'm hoping that you've heard of the brands that it owns, which would be brands like Mr. Electric, Mr. Rooter, Rainbow Air Serve, Molly Maids. 2 million times a year, an employee of one of our franchisees goes into your home or business to fix or maintain something. And every time they do, we get a piece of that revenue in the form of that royalty. And for that, we provide a remarkable amount of training systems so that the franchise owner, who might be literally a plumber, who might be a veteran wanting to start her own business, we give them the recipe to be successful, and have made countless people millionaires by growing their own businesses. Again, with your commitment to free enterprise, I believe the franchise business model is a wonderful example of free enterprise in action. And then finally, I'll mention one in our education and training specialty. And I mentioned this one because I can almost see it from my office in Terminal Tower. It's located down the road out in Huron, Ohio. And it's called N2Y. And N2Y provides the curriculum that you would use if you were a special education teacher to help these needy students to learn, in many cases using current events as a way to do that. The name N2Y stands for News to You. It was started by a speech pathologist who was frustrated by the fact that she didn't have better materials. She would literally go home at night and on poster board glue things as curriculum for these needy students, and left teaching herself to form the company in the spare bedroom in their home. Over time, her son, her daughter, her husband, and ultimately her daughter's husband got involved. So talk about a family business, but it had reached a scale where it needed professionalization, and where the founder deserved the right to enjoy some of the fruits of her labor. So we became the partner to the family, buying a controlling interest. The family retained a significant minority interest, and we grew it dramatically together, selling it, but 5 years later. But in the sale, we retained another 20% interest because we're so passionate about that company. And I should have mentioned on Dwyer, we've owned that 3 times now. So when we find a great company, in some ways we never want to sell it.
I got a bunch of questions here, Stewart. What is your take on the current push to change the way carried interest is taxed?
So, this has been something that has been talked about on and off for many years. It seems to be on again. First thing I want to say is that there's a lot of misunderstandings, I think, about the way it's taxed. Journalists routinely describe it as a carried interest loophole. And when I've looked up the definition of loophole, I don't think something that's been around for literally decades, used in tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of transactions, used not only by people that do private equity, but any of you who do real estate development, venture capital and the like. So it's well established in the tax code. And it's well established there because it has proven to be a way to incentivize people to take a lot of risk, to do a lot of work, to launch one of these transactions with the hope that when it works, if it works, there's going to be a significant reward for their efforts. Nobody goes back and says, hey, for entrepreneurs that started a company and then maybe didn't get paid all they could have or should have along the way, but at the end had a big payday. Nobody goes back and says, hey, we should redefine that income such that some of it is ordinary income that they didn't get paid, and some of it was capital gains. It's the reward, it's the fruit of your labors. So my own view is I don't agree with the way it's characterized, and I would also say that I think there's a misunderstanding in terms of the impact it would have on taxation, federal coffers, if you will, because in many cases, what's being reallocated traditionally is a 20% carried interest, and it's being reassigned from the limited partners to the general partner. The limited partners in our transactions are heavily pension funds, endowments, foundations, and the like, who do not pay taxes. I can assure you I pay taxes. The 330 folks that work at Riverside pay taxes, as does everybody who works in private equity. So this is actually a redirection of the gain from non-tax paying people to tax paying people, thereby increasing the collection of taxes. Having said all of that, I can certainly understand why in a politically charged environment, in an environment where populism is so powerful, and an environment where people have views of social justice that are deeply felt and there are a lot of wrongs, why people would seize upon this as an issue and say that the tax on carried interest should be higher. And if that's ultimately the will of Congress, we'll, obviously we'll pay it. We pay all of our taxes. But I don't agree at all with the way it's often characterized as if it's some sort of like loophole, no-brainer, something that people who are too clever figured out. It's the tax code, and it's the tax code for very good reasons.
Thank you. Just want to make sure we're okay on time with you. Do you have time for a couple more questions, or maybe one?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Let's see. Can you share some experience with investing in and working with their Chinese portfolio company? And have you had any exits from Chinese portfolio companies?
So I mentioned that we have an office in China, but that office exists to help all of our companies around the world that are buying, selling, or operating in China to do so more effectively. Companies of the size that we invest in can't afford to have necessarily their own offices in China, if you will. So we can become that for them, but we are not investors in Chinese companies. So
Gotcha.
I don't have firsthand experience there.
Okay. Of the 4,000 companies that you look at, can you tell how many you actually make offers on and how many of those close?
Yeah. So we obviously track this, what we call the waterfall, and to look at it crudely, about a third of the 4,000 are worthy of digging in. In other words, after we look at some basic information, we say it's not going to be a fit for us. So that takes you down to north of 1,000, 1,300 or so. Of those, we're going to visit, in the old days, mostly in person, in the new world, often virtually. We're going to be visiting several hundred of them, perhaps as many as 300 of them. And then that's going to continue down the waterfall ultimately to what we buy, which is going to be in a typical year around 50 of them. So if you want to think about it very crudely, you could say that of all the companies we hear about as being potentially of interest, 10% of them get serious attention and 1% of them ultimately get bought.
Gotcha. Specific question, what are the kind of multiples you're seeing in the SaaS world? And in that world, are you seeing valuations change to multiples of ARR versus EBITDA?
Yeah. So the SaaS world has pretty much collapsed to valuing businesses based on multiples of ARR. If you're a more mature SaaS business and you have a lot of EBITDA, then people will consider that in the valuation too. But most of these businesses are still younger, faster growing, and are being valued as multiple of revenues. Broadly speaking, those businesses would be valued at somewhere between 3 and 20 times or more ARR. I realize that's kind of too broad, but those are the facts. Smaller ones with less compelling propositions could be as low as 3, although generally you're going to, for one of quality, it's going to start more like 4 or 5 times. On the upper end, if to get 20 or north, you're probably talking about a larger company, a unicorn type opportunity in terms of scale. But even in our market, we see a lot of very good SaaS businesses that would trade for 10 times. If they become mature enough to have real EBITDA, the people will consider that, but it wouldn't be unusual for folks to pay as much as 20 or 25 times EBITDA.
Have you considered digital therapy companies? They received $14 billion in funding alone last year, and McKinsey opines that they will transform healthcare.
So from my service on the board of the Cleveland Clinic, I'm a believer, if you will, in digital healthcare. And we would definitely consider such companies if we found ones of our scale. We're not going to do the teledocs and the biggest opportunities, but at our size range, we absolutely would. It's becoming a larger and larger percentage of healthcare. Obviously, it got accelerated like so many things through COVID, but I don't think it goes back just because COVID goes away. All of us would much prefer to jump online and get an accurate diagnosis and prescription rather than to go into a facility and go through the waiting process that we've all experienced. And in so many areas, like obviously telepsychiatry, but also dermatology and many areas, it can be done very successfully.
Maybe one last question. Your early background includes work with the National Cooperative Business Association. How did this experience shape your path into finance and private equity, and can you comment on the state of cooperative businesses today?
So that was the first 10 years of my career, but it was over 30 years ago. While I've followed it from a distance, I don't really feel qualified to speak, other than to say that cooperatives are more important in our economy, perhaps than many of us appreciate, whether that's the housing co-ops or the electric or telephone co-ops, obviously the agricultural co-ops, credit unions, which are financial cooperatives. So they're a bigger part of the economy than people appreciate. I had a outstanding opportunity at a young age to be involved internationally with cooperatives, to be helped to start new cooperatives, to help cooperatives to grow, to be involved in the legislative and lobbying process so that cooperatives had proper aid and treatment. So it was a great experience for me, but I can't really say that it one-on-one mapped to what I'm doing today. When in 1987, when I made the decision to do something different, if it wasn't a 180, it was a 140.
Well, Stewart, I've really enjoyed talking to you and interviewing you, so to speak. And as I can speak for everyone else, we really appreciate you being generous with your time and talking with us. Any last words you want to share with thoughts on 2021 or thoughts on the Indians?
I'm pretty optimistic about 2021. We obviously have a lot still to get through here, but we have an economist at Riverside that we use, and even in the depths of COVID, which would have been April or May of last year, he was fond of saying that he believes that the economy was strong going into COVID and that it wants to get better. That was his quote. And I think that's still the case. It wants to get better. It's needed a lot of help to get better. That's both fiscal and monetary. But I think it is. And M&A and private equity, as I mentioned, did come kind of roaring back in Q4 of last year. It started this year very strong. And if there isn't another big exogenous shock, I believe that we'll see a very robust 2021. But in terms of the last thing I'm going to share with your participants, Eric, is, and this maybe dovetails a bit with my comments on carried interest. I think there's a narrative sometimes that private equity is evil, that private equity goes in and somehow damages companies, and we can all certainly hear individual examples of transactions that didn't work and were damaging, and Riverside has some of those too. But as an asset class, if you will, we at Riverside believe that private equity is overwhelmingly a force for good. The way we make money is by making the companies we invest in bigger and better, not by breaking them up or knocking them down. It's the only way we can make money. And overwhelmingly, that's what we do. We believe that private equity is an important part of our capital markets. It's an important part of our free enterprise system, if you will. And in this very charged period, in this period again, where calls for social justice are heartfelt and needed, I hope we don't throw out babies with the bathwater, because I think the United States and increasingly other parts of the world have really been advantaged by having robust private capital markets to fund innovation and growth, and to reward entrepreneurs who start and grow businesses. And I believe entrepreneurs are the lifeblood of our economy. They make our economy go round. And it's very important that they have access to capital to grow their businesses. And it's very important that they have the sense that if they work hard and they do it right over an extended period of time, there is the potential for an outsized reward. And to me, that's what private capital provides. Absolutely, and well said, and what a great last closing comment. So, Stewart, again, thank you so much for your time, and have a great 2021. Yeah, you too, Eric. Thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for your listeners.